I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. It is upon their ancestral lands that the University of Sydney is built. As we share our own knowledge, teaching, learning and research practices within this university, may we also pay respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country, as we also pay respect to elders past and present. So, the idea for the ADR18 conference, or the Annual Design Research Conference, was initially hatched in a meeting at the Architectural Design Research Group at the University of Sydney, School of Architecture, Design and Planning. It's one of 4 research groups we have here in the school, and in our group we were concerned about finding an appropriate forum to discuss our work. We're also concerned with the problems associated with producing valid and indeed valuable design research outputs, and we were eager to make sure that our work would be comparable of the works of more traditional research methods. But unlike other research groups in our school, it struck us as odd that there was no annual conference that could fully embrace our work, and so we decided to make one. We knew that architectural history and theory has SAHANS, of course. Architectural science has the ASA conference. Heritage studies has ICOMOS. Until recently, the AASA annual meeting often had a strong design research focus, but we understood that this was not so much a standing conference, but rather organised at the discretion of the committee on a one-off basis, case-by-case basis. Similarly, we're also aware of the work that some of you, I'm sure, have been involved in the Design Architecture Practice Research Group, or DAPR, but to our knowledge that was never intended to be an ongoing forum, rather a temporarily limited space. We also felt that the absence of an annual forum devoted to design research in the built environment, specifically in the Australian context, was particularly odd given the leading role that Australian institutions have played, and here I'm talking specifically about RMIT, in developing and popularising this form of research. Currently in Australia, many schools either have a cohort of PhD candidates working in the area, or at least have plans to launch a program. Yet, it seemed that beyond some notable exceptions, discussions and events in the field are still mainly in-house affairs. So with ADR18, it's our hope to take these discussions to a national and international setting. Now, this conference is the result of an amazing group effort. I like to say, and I've been saying it all week, that some of our colleagues said this couldn't be done in the time frame that we set about doing it in, but 1 year later, here we are. This is overwhelmingly due to Sarah Breen-Lovett's dedication. Sarah, sitting up here in the front corner, can you stand up and just... Sarah's a postdoc here in the lab, but I'll tell you for a fact that all of the work that she's done in putting together the conference has been well over and above her normal job description here, and it's only really through her generosity and her attention to detail and all the work that she's done that we're sitting here today. She's done a really fantastic job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks go also to our colleagues from the Architectural Design Research Group, many of whom are on the steering committee, who are session chairs. I also want to thank the wider scientific committee that included people from outside the University of Sydney. A full list, it was a lot of people. I thought there was already a lot of names here to thank, but the full list of the scientific committee is published in the proceedings. Which takes me to the next thanks, which is to Duncan Maxwell for putting together the proceedings, which I think we've codenamed this morning the Bible. For the exhibition design and install, I'd really like to thank Rachel Cooper and Ivana Kuzmanovska. Can you put your hands up? The back. Thank you, guys. I'd also like to thank all the volunteers, the session chairs, which, without whom, of course, there would be no conference. And just in finishing the thanks, I want to give a shout out to all the people from Australia and New Zealand who responded to that initial call for support back in, I think it was October, November 2017. It really was the overwhelming response to that call which gave us the impetus to move forward in this and gave us what I thought we needed, which was a mandate from all of the Australasian schools of architecture, indeed built environment, to move forward with the initiative. So I want to thank you. I know many of you are here in the audience today. Talk a little bit about what the purpose of the conference is. So initially we hope that the conference can address several pragmatic issues, challenges in the higher education setting. Firstly, what role can non-traditional research outputs, or NTROs as they're called in the business, play within an increasingly metric-driven research environment? 2, how can research be carried out within the design research field be better represented in research ranking exercises such as ERA or Excellence in Research Australia? And further, how can projects and teams in this area get better access to research funding from groups such as the ARC? To those of us who are active in the field and trying to get research funding, we know that the odds still favour more traditional modes of inquiry. That it's easier to demonstrate the quality of a journal publication than it is an NTRO. Also, we thought that an annual conference could help at the level of day-to-day problems encountered by researchers. Support and networking are significant issues for researchers, and personally, as a researcher with interest in history and theory, I was very lucky to enjoy the collegial support of Sahans as an early career researcher. And we obviously hope that ADR will provide such a forum for our current cohort of PhDs and postdocs. Also, as a supervisor of PhD candidates in the field, I wondered how could I get access to the shared knowledge of colleagues working in this field. I hope as well that the ADR will take the knowledge out of the realm of the individual and connections and networks that people may have, and establish a platform for like-minded supervisors and researchers. And I think it will also help establish a pool of peer reviewers and potential examiners, I should say, for our PhD candidates. And I think in the end, we hope that the ADR conference will address many of these questions that I've raised, and also establish a vibrant and collegial discourse in the area. But what kind of conference should it be? It's very important to us, and I want to say very clearly from the outset, that this is not to be seen as a University of Sydney venture. This is not a Sydney or Melbourne affair. I know, having worked in Brisbane for many years, that we often think that everything's happening down in Sydney and Melbourne, but that's not what this is about. And it's also not a narrowly Australian event. We really see this as a shared initiative. After this conference in 2019, it will be held at Monash University in Melbourne, and plans are afoot for it to be held at the University of Tasmania in Launceston in 2020. Another important part of our thinking about what kind of conference ADR should be was the issue of openness. Design research is relatively new, but we're all aware that the field already contains many hotly contested positions within it. Despite this, we hope that the ADR conference will be a broad-minded and pluralist network, and one that can act in a self-assured manner, precisely because we are aware that different schools of thought exist. So we hope this group will be inclusive of the inherent variety in the field and be open to programs that are either established or emerging, both from our region and internationally. A few words about the format. As design research is a relative newcomer, we think the rules and expectations for it are not yet fully set. The conference format itself was the subject here in the school of early and adventurous discussion. I would point out that this discussion is by no means finished, and owing to the nature of design, and dare I say designers, may never be finished. What we knew, however, was that the conference, or a conference devoted to design research, should tackle the issue of format in a novel and creative way. Therefore, we invited conventional papers and text-based research outputs, but we also invited researchers to show and talk about prototypes, models and designs, along with performances, screenings and installations. This variety of media meant we changed the traditional call for papers to a call for proposals. Over the following 2 days, you'll see the fruits of this as a mix of talking, presentation, exhibition, performance, and discussion. Additionally, we are insistent in including research from outside the university. Researchers active in practice can get CPD points for participation, and we're happy to say that a few practitioners have made contributions to the conference. We think that this is just one of the very distinctive features that design research has, that is that it can be carried out in industry as well as the university, and we really hope that this stream is one that will grow in the years to come. Another important part of our thinking was the issue of research outputs. We all know that to build a sustainable conference and to keep up future attendance, we need to make high-quality outputs that can be counted by our various institutions. So we developed a two-pronged approach to this issue. Firstly, we've developed the Hanson Conference Proceedings, which I mentioned before. That's a record of all peer-reviewed submissions. And secondly, we secured a commitment to publish selected outputs through Drawing On, an Edinburgh University-based peer-reviewed journal of research by design. Through this collaboration, selected ADR18 proposals will be considered for publication. One of the other major advantages offered by an online journal is that it allows for a wide range of formats and breadth of media. There's effectively no limit to the length or the type of media that you can include, which we think is obviously essential for design research outputs. So we have a little word from Drawing On in the shape of a video from the editors that will play in this room during the break. And so I encourage all of you who are intending to publish or who would like to publish in Drawing On, either as an outcome of this conference or independently in your own right later on, to come and have a look what the editors have said. So now that we've dealt with, I guess, some of the, what you might call mechanics of the conference, I'd like to get a little bit closer to the parts that I love about design research, what motivates me, and I think what has brought us all together. Like many of you here today, I consider myself both a design research practitioner and commentator. And as I pointed out earlier, most Australasian schools either have a cohort of PhDs working on design research or at least have plans to launch a program. I think this rise in interest is largely due to the opportunities that design research appears to offer in addition to more established and traditional methodologies. But these obvious opportunities and the enthusiasm for design research should not overshadow the fact that there are still significant challenges that exist. Challenges, moreover, that partly led to the advent of this conference. So where are we? I want to talk a little bit more about my personal experiences as a practitioner of design research within the university context. And by practitioner, I mean someone who is supervisor to PhD candidates and other researchers active in the field, someone who's helping to develop programs in this field, sitting on academic research committees, writing, lecturing, teaching, the theory and practice of design research, and finally directing and carrying out research myself on projects in our lab. I think it's fair to say that there remains a lot of confusion around design research, both internal and external to the field. At a day-to-day level of operation, my personal experience has not always been favourable or smooth within the university context. My colleagues from design disciplines say we've been doing this for 30 years. My friends from the humanities like to ask, what's the difference between design research and practice? For the sciences, design research can be too subjective and isn't rigorous enough. And from some other unnamed sources, I've heard it said, not just once, that it's just not research. But rather than rehash this territory, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, I think a more reasonable way forward, and the way that I would like to propose, is to look for points of consensus. What do we know? Can a mode of research which has design at its core answer questions that other modes cannot? I think the answer to that question is a resounding yes. Is there value in better understanding and making more explicit the kinds of methods and knowledge that designers use to solve problems and frame questions? I think the answer to that question is also a resounding yes. Is there broad agreement around the purpose, position, and scope of design research? No, I don't think there isn't. and have the rules and expectations around this form of research crystallise into clear forms like those of other modes? I think the answer to that is also unknown. So in thinking more about these questions, I want to go back and discuss a book review that I wrote, what I consider to be a seminal text in the area, Murray Fraser's edited book, Design Research in Architecture, an overview published by Ashgate in 2013, to which some of our Australian colleagues who might be here in the audience contributed. In my review, I posited that the publication of Fraser's volume laid bare at least, and I should be very clear about at least, two major camps in the field. Although I didn't do it in the review, you might refer to these two different camps as hard and soft. Now, because my review of Fraser's book didn't appear in print until March 2016, it allowed me to not only review the book, but also review its reviews, and in particular a review by Brian Lawson, who many of you may know as a kind of leading figure in the design studies, design methods movement. Lawson's review was fairly scathing. In summary, we might say that he picked up Fraser's book looking for structure and truth, but he found something else. Lawson rightly notes that there is a very different vision at work in Fraser's curation of his 11 co-authors, one that he found, and I quote, disorganised. In his review, he noted, and I quote, "Much of the writing here suggests that the authors might see a lack of structure as inherently desirable," end of quote. Ouch. Indeed, many of Fraser's contributing authors do not come from the design methods, design studies axis, but rather from a humanities and creative arts background. That, broadly generalised, appears to pay little heed to a highly systematised and structured view of the theory and practice of design. This structured, rigorous and systematic view of the nature of design is clearly outlined in Lawson's most well-known book, How Designers Think, The Design Process Demystified, first published in 1980 and now in its fourth edition. On a side note, I would say that Shane Murray's essay in Murray Fraser's collection is perhaps the exception in that it attempts to find a framework which he terms design matrix that can give rigour and structure to research. But in returning to Lawson, it's the last word of Lawson's book title that's the operative one here, I think, demystified. So we have to go back to Lawson's work to see what is missing in Fraser's collection, and I think specifically of his three-axis model of design problems. Lawson is clearly searching for an essence, a model of truth in his quest to demystify design. A search that is perhaps more akin to the sciences and social sciences in its objective to be repeatable and explicit. This, of course, is very different to the task that Fraser's collection sets itself, and that is the cultivation of a free-ranging interpretation, subjectivity, creativity, taste, and the valuation of the intangible aspects of architecture, design, and art. Like so many academic disputes, I can't help but feel that much of Lawson's bite might have been taken out with a few well-placed acknowledgements to his own work. Nevertheless, this criticism is not all unfounded. He raises a valid question around the difference between architecture design practice and architectural design research, provocatively exclaiming, and I quote, "When, if at all, can designing be said not to be research?" Following Lawson, we might also ask what differentiates design research from the better end of professional practice? System, rigour, level of uptake, or the transportability of its findings, perhaps? Or perhaps even something like use value. So here we see two camps emerge, the hard and the soft camps. A harder social scientific response and a softer response founded on the humanities and the creative arts. Of this hard camp, we might say its features are that it's systematic, explicit, objective, repeatable, it's more scientific, or at least it's tending in that direction, it's deductive and it's linear. Of the softer camp, we might say that it's all about being creative, subjective, artistic, inductive, iterative, or at least non-linear, and more likely to see the creative process as a kind of black box that's unknowable or undefinable. Now, those of you who know me personally will know that I'm a self-confessed moderate, a pluralist in that regard, and I think that there's clear value in both schools of thought, particularly because of the inherent pluralism which I believe is the root condition of design research. Indeed, like I pointed out earlier, I think that diversity of thought is an acknowledgement of the maturity of the discourse surrounding design research and not some kind of weakness to be eliminated. Therefore, I think it's important that we do not continue to insist on the polarity of the hard and soft, but to see this as a spectrum that can be inclusive of a much wider variety and richness. Indeed, I feel confident that this is not only possible, but that it works, because this is what we do in the Innovation and Applied Design Lab here at the University of Sydney. And I think, speaking from my own experience, that this has been a really positive and interesting marriage between the more creative and artistic and technical and scientific approaches in design research. Speaking further from some personal experience, and as someone who returned to the opportunities of design research through a very intense tour of duty in the humanities, it's an understatement to say that I see huge potential in design research. Through our projects, I've been looking beyond the knowledge we generate in our work to the structure of that knowledge and to the broader role of research and knowledge production in contemporary society. In doing so, a colleague, notably an engineer of mine from Sweden, pointed me towards this book and what it terms Mode 2 research. The production of new knowledge, the dynamics of science, research and contemporary societies was first published in 1994 and was the product of a large collaborative effort by 6 international scholars led by Michael Gibbons. The book identified and defined a new mode of knowledge production, Mode 2, that could explain and respond to emerging demands, where the traditional mode of academic and scientific knowledge production was termed Mode 1. This emergent mode of knowledge production was obviously termed Mode 2. And as the authors describe it, and I quote, "Our view is that while Mode 2 may not be replacing Mode 1 completely, Mode 2 is different from Mode 1 in nearly every respect. The new mode operates within the context of application, in that problems are not set within a disciplinary framework. It is transdisciplinary rather than mono or multidisciplinary. It is carried out in a non-hierarchical, heterogeneously organised forms which are essentially transient. It is not being institutionalised primarily within university structures. Mode 2 involves close interaction of many actors throughout the process of knowledge production, and this means that knowledge production is becoming more socially accountable." In many ways, this text describes a mode of working familiar to those engaged in R&D projects between the university and industry, like our lab. And I think it raises many issues within the higher education framework which we still need to address. Among them, I would make a couple of claims. Don't aim for respectability in a value system that may already be superseded. Lots of effort, I think, has been applied in the past decade at making design research respectable in the university operating environment, so they can sit side by side with the other more established forms of research. This is a worthwhile endeavour, no doubt, but it does not take into account that much of this traditional system is being superseded and may already be, to some degree, outmoded. According to the authors of the book, progressively it is being replaced and augmented by Mode 2. The emergence of design thinking is a good case in point, I think, which can largely be explained by the rise of Mode 2. Design thinking is a real credit to those design disciplines who have pointed their knowledge at anything and indeed everything where it might even appear vaguely useful. Banks now have CDOs, or Chief Design Officers. What, we might ask, stops designers from built environment fields doing the same? Some more examples of this shift to Mode 2. The recent introduction of impact into the metrics of ERA and REF is Mode 2. The importance of engagement with outside groups, community, government and industry is also Mode 2. The second claim that I'd like to make is that design research in built environment fields has a natural advantage under the new condition of Mode 2. Precisely because design research in built environment fields must be transdisciplinary, community and industry engaged, and seek to bring about change in people's lives through real-world problems, we might claim that design research in built environment fields has these natural advantages by its very nature and can exploit these advantages in this new world of Mode 2 research. But, and there's always a but, this does not mean that we are somehow magically on easy street because we employ design research and because we work in built environment fields. I want to close by outlining my top 6 challenges that I've encountered as a practitioner of design research. Continuity of knowledge. Research in the humanities and sciences are predicated on the idea of continuity of knowledge. How does this work in design research? I think it is really hard to guarantee, and it's even harder to define what continuity of knowledge looks like in design research. And I actually question whether there's even any value in providing continuity. Transportability. How do we make design research that's useful for more than the individuals who are immediately partaking in the research? How can its findings become transportable to other contexts and other problems? 3, it's volume. Unlike text-based methods, which are physically and spatially defined, for example, 80,000 words for a traditional dissertation, design research does not have clear expectations in terms of volumes. If a picture tells 1,000 words, how many words is a design word? How many words is a new building or prototype worth, and how should they be relatively valued? Scope. Other research methods aim to reduce scope over the course of the research, not increase it. But because design is generative, integrative, and synthetic, it touches many fields and many problems, and has a kind of free-range approach to knowledge acquisition. If the expectations of other modes of research do not necessarily hold, what is an appropriate scope for a design research dissertation, for example? Subjectivity. Good design, in my view, always involves an element of subjectivity and taste. I think this is much less an option, but rather core to the DNA of the project of design. But how much is enough? How much is too much? And when does it become willful, flippant, or irrelevant? And finally, an interesting question I think that came out of Fraser's book is, does design research have a canon? And if so, what might constitute such a canon? Now, I don't expect there are any easy answers to these challenges, but it is precisely the point of this conference to open these challenges up to discussion. So, in concluding, I just want to say that along with all the benefits that we hope the ADR conference will bring in years to come, more than anything, we hope that you will look forward to it as a fixture in the annual research calendar that is known as an inclusive, rewarding, and dare I say, even fun event. On behalf of the organising committee at the University of Sydney, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the next few days. Thank you. Some housekeeping-y events. There was recently a room name change in this building, and so rooms that formerly had names that I could remember have been changed to other rooms which have numbers now that I can't remember. But the great thing about the conference is that for the duration of the whole 2 days, including the final keynote lecture, will all happen on this level of the building. And there are effectively 3 or 4 sites, depending on how you look at it. There's this room, which is the main lecture room and has the largest capacity. For the sessions that we'll go straight out into now, there are 2 rooms, one over here, which is 271. 270. I wasn't lying. And the other one is 231 on the other side of the exhibition room. Obviously, the exhibition is in the main space that you all walked into where the welcome was. That's also where our dinner will be held tonight. We'll be sitting in amongst the exhibition, which we're really happy about. We didn't have to go off-site for that. And the keynote tomorrow morning will happen here at 10 o'clock, Leon van Sky. And then our final keynote and wrap-up will be Mamoyo Kajima here in this room again at 5:30 on Friday night. And those of you who are here for the 2 days, I really encourage you to come to that final event. I think it's going to be not only a very interesting lecture, but a very good party afterwards. Our friends from the Sydney Architecture Festival will be arriving with literally a couple of truckloads of architects, among other designers, who will be coming to have their opening event here. So there'll be somewhere between 100 and 200 people from that conference coming here to join us. So we're expecting a very big party. The other thing that I should have said is that we're also celebrating the 100-year anniversary of this School of Architecture at the moment. And an exhibition that celebrates this history, and particularly the history and design, art practice and social activism at the University of Sydney is on display over in what's called the Tin Sheds Gallery, where you can also learn a little bit more about why it's called the Tin Sheds Gallery. So again, welcome. Let's start the sessions.